I lost my own father at 12 years of age and know what it is to be raised on lies and silences. My dear daughter, you are presently too young to understand a word I write, but this history is for you and will contain no single lie. May I burn in hell if I speak false. God willing, I shall live to see you read these words, to witness your astonishment and see your dark eyes widen and your jaw drop when you finally comprehend the injustice we poor Irish suffered in this present age. How queer and foreign it must seem to you, and all the coarse words and cruelty which I now relate are far away in ancient time.
Ήρθαμε στη Νέα Υόρκη για να συναντήσουμε έναν Αυστραλό συγγραφέα, ένα από τα μεγαλύτερα ονόματα της σύγχρονης αγγλοσαξονικής λογοτεχνίας. Ο Πίτερ Κάρεϊ ζει σε αυτή την πόλη, στην καρδιά της, στην Broadway Street από το 1990, όταν εγκατέλειψε την πατρίδα του ακολουθώντας τι άλλο, μια γυναίκα. Δύο μόνο συγγραφείς έχουν καταφέρει μέχρι σήμερα να κερδίσουν 2 φορές το Μπούκερ. Ο ένας είναι ο νομπελίστας ο Κούτσι, ο άλλος είναι ο Πίτερ Κάρεϊ. Πράγμα που έκανε ιδιαίτερα ευτυχείς τους Αυστραλούς, οι οποίοι για να τον τιμήσουν του αφιέρωσαν μια σειρά από γραμματόσημα. Σήμερα, εκτός από το να γράφει μυθιστορήματα, ο Κάρεϊ είναι διευθυντής ενός προγράμματος δημιουργικής γραφής σε ένα γνωστό κολέγιο της πόλης. Μια ενασχόληση που τον ενδιαφέρει ιδιαίτερα, γιατί πιστεύει ότι με αυτόν τον τρόπο δίνει μια συνέχεια στην επιβίωση της καλής λογοτεχνίας σε αυτούς τους δύσκολους καιρούς που ζούμε.
Ο Πίτερ Κάρεϊ έγινε γνωστό στο ευρύτερο κοινό με το μυθιστόρημά του «Η αληθινή ιστορία της συμμορίας Κέλλη», ένα βιβλίο που βασίζεται σε ένα πραγματικό πρόσωπο, έναν μύθο της Αυστραλίας, τον Νετ Κέλλη, αλογοκλέφτη, ληστή, εγκληματία για τους διώκτες του και ήρωα για τους οπαδούς του, επειδή αντιστάθηκε στην εξουσία, στην καταπιεστική εξουσία των Βρετανικών αρχών. Το πιο πρόσφατο μυθιστόρημα του Πίτερ Κάρεϊ είναι ο «ΠΑΠΑΓΑΛΟΣ και ΟΛΙΒΙΕ», που συζητιέται πάρα πολύ, γιατί πρόκειται για ένα σχόλιο στην Αμερικανική δημοκρατία. Εδώ ο Κάρεϊ αναφέρεται και πάλι σε ένα ιστορικό πρόσωπο, τον Αλεξίς ντε Τοκβίλ, ο οποίος επισκέπτεται την Αμερική, την επομένη της Γαλλικής Επανάστασης, για να εξετάσει το αμερικανικό πείραμα. Το ενδιαφέρον με αυτό το συγγραφέα είναι ότι κάθε του μυθιστόρημα είναι εντελώς διαφορετικό από τα προηγούμενα. Για τον προσεκτικό αναγνώστη όμως υπάρχουν κάποια κοινά στοιχεία. Είναι το θέμα της ελευθερίας, το θέμα του αυθεντικού και του πλαστού, το θέμα της προσωπικής αξιοπρέπειας και της προσωπικής ήττας. It's Ανταίος and Μικέλα.
A very nice house, eh?
Well, we'll be selling it soon. Anyway. Yes.
This is the office or the house?
It's a house. I write there. When my wife works at home, she works back there.
You make changes.
Yes,
well, it was one of the few, mostly in New York, if you go around and you're looking at what people have done to lofts, it's sort of often quite disgusting. So the thing that we did with this place is basically lifted the configuration of it, sort of how it was, and put in. But you can see all the way through out the back, and we sleep around the corner at the back. And so the only thing that's really original is the window. It feels like it felt There was a dancer who'd lived here for a long time. And,
it's difficult to find an apartment in Manhattan or not?
It's hard to find an old building that has not been destroyed by it.
We know that you were born in Australia in 1943, that your parents ran a General Motors dealership. We know that when you were 20 years old, you began to work to advertising section. And we know also that when you were 30, you have published your first collection of short stories, Fat Man in History. When you started to think to become a writer?
Well, I think growing up in my small town, I would have been very surprised to even meet a writer. I would have thought if somebody had said, one day you will meet a writer, I would have been very excited. So it was a long way from where I came to. But I left school and went to university intending to be a scientist, and very quickly failed spectacularly and had to get a job. And by chance, decided I'd get a job at an advertising agency. And in the advertising agency, there were all these people who were writing short stories and writing novels, and there were also painters, and it was a very unusual advertising agency. The chief executive had been a communist. I worked for three advertising agencies in Melbourne, all of whom were run by former communists. and they turned out to be quite nice places to work, actually. So, but it was then that I really began to read, and that I really began to see that writing might be something one could do. And so my education in reading and writing all came together, and my reading was very, I didn't read in the 19th century, certainly not the 18th century. I wouldn't read anything Australian because I would think that was no good. A perfectly colonial sort of way to think. And but I read a lot of modernist work, and I jumped straight into James Joyce and Ulysses and Beckett and Camus and Kafka and whatever.
It's strange because usually we say that advertising, it's a profession very superficial. I mean, and the writing in this profession, it's always the promotion. The first idea is promotion. It's not the depth as your literature became.
I guess we can inhabit all sorts of different roles in life, and one can go and do something that's relatively superficial without being permanently scarred by it. I think that I was always very concerned that people would think me superficial because I worked in advertising. And when I met people at a party, they would say, well, what are you doing? And I say, well, I'm working in advertising, but I'm really a writer. I'm really writing a novel. And then they'd laugh at me. And then we'd have a big fight, and then we'd be friends. So this issue was a big part of my early life.
And now you are running a program of creative writing. Do you teach your own experience?
Really to teach creative writing is not to persuade other people to be like you, because and I think that if you're going to do this, that your first responsibility is not to hurt or destroy anybody, because people are very vulnerable when they're in that situation of growing and learning. But I think that my job there is to help them do what it is that they want to do. And maybe it's better to think of the good creative writing teacher as being like an editor almost, of finding a way to alert the student how they can think about what they're doing. Like, for instance, it might be you might find a story that's sort of awful, but in its center has this lovely luminous thing. And you can read it, and if you're a writer, you read that and you know that that's what the student really wanted to do, and all the rest has been built around the beautiful thing, and so you say to the student, that's where you started, isn't it? That's what you wanted to do. And they go, how did you know that? And because it's clear, and so then you help them to sort of figure out what other things they might do with that, how they might structure it and explore it, and they can learn, they can get better.
Oh, this is the first talent you need to become a writer. I mean, The observation, and it's or what else?
It's my general observation that most writers start off being very, very good about how they feel. I am this, I feel this, and not generally very good at seeing you are there, you are there. And the self-obsession of writers seems to carry through in life, and learning to look outwards is something that doesn't come naturally.
This is most important than the fantasy, for example.
Well, I wouldn't separate fantasy from anything. I mean, if you're going to have fantasy, you still have to sit down somewhere, or you've got to walk on something. And you've got to have trees, and then presumably the trees have to have a biology and have to be named. And so you have to think about how things might really work. Is that making sense?
Yes, yes, of course. Δεν υπήρχε αμφιβολία στο μυαλό μου ότι αργά ή γρήγορα έπρεπε να ξεπεράσω την αίσθηση καθήκοντος απέναντι στη μητέρα μου. Έπρεπε να διαγράψω τις αρχαίες διαδρομές που με οδήγησαν σε αυτό το σημείο. Να κόψω τη ρίζα των Κλαρέλ και των Μπαρφλέρ, όλα όσα διασφάλιζαν τη θέση μου στον κόσμο και την ελπίδα μου για δόξα. Και όπως το παρελθόν μου στη Γαλλία δεν ήταν καθόλου σίγουρο, ούτε το μέλλον μου μπορούσε να είναι, όταν ακόμα και τώρα το ίδιο μου το είδος, οι αριστοκράτες, αντιμετωπιζόταν για μία ακόμα φορά ως εχθρός του έθνους. Αν αυτός ο θανάσιμος κίνδυνος ήταν προνόμιο της θέσης, γιατί να μην την πετάξω από πάνω μου? Δεν ήταν προτιμότερη η Αμερικανική δημοκρατία? Ο αναβρασμός στη Γαλλία δεν ήταν μήπως αποτέλεσμα της αναπόφευκτης κατεύθυνσής της προς τη δημοκρατία? Μια δόλια συμβολή όπου ο ποταμός της αριστοκρατίας έσμιγε με τον ωκεανό της ισότητας. Δεν ήταν καλύτερα να κατοικεί στο μέλλον παρά στο παρελθόν? Κι αν το μέλλον φάνταζε ημιτελές και πεζό, δεν ήταν επίσης απαλλαγμένο από πολιτική και κόμματα? Στην Αμερική δεν υπήρχαν τα δικά μας σχίσματα, οι αρχαίες βουτυγμένες στο αίμα διχόνοιες. Δεν ανακάλυπτα καμία σοβαρότερη έρηδα εδώ από τη φιλονικία των βιομηχανικών πολιτιών με τις αγροτικές σχετικά με τη διατίμηση. You often use historical figures or literature, characters of literature. Isn't it narrowing your imagination?
Oh no. And about, with Parrott and Olivier in America, for instance, I'm sitting here in this apartment, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and these people who I would personally regard as criminal are running the country. And I'm thinking about it every day. And I'm looking out the window and I'm thinking about where I am, and I have this notion. I've never read Tocqueville's Democracy in America, but I have this notion that people are saying that Tocqueville loved democracy in America and thought it was the most wonderful thing, and he's taught in colleges, I think, and indeed discovered in a sort of like he's a booster. He loves America and he loves democracy. But when you actually start to read Tocqueville, you see Tocqueville's fears. I can see Tocqueville's fears out my window. The sort of, what happens if the president's an idiot, for instance? It would be something that would worry Tocqueville.